Wanted to go through the parkland dedication requirements for this development. Currently contains 20 acres of net developable land within the Harvest Hills proposed subdivision. Within the R2 zone, that requires 5% dedication of the net developable area, which results in a requirement of 1 acre to be dedicated as part of this development. And the applicant right now is proposed to dedicate parkland in 3 different locations. They had subtracted 1 moving through the process, but I'll go over all 4 of those right now. The one's 3,333 square foot dedication, which is the 25-foot linear pathway on the east side of Mountain View. There's also the 35-foot linear pathway on the east side of Mountain View that currently exists, and that encompasses 22,491 square feet. You also have the cul-de-sac park at the end of Amber Court, the large teardrop shaped park in the center of that one-way drive. You also have a 10,541 square foot strip of land east of lots 1, 2, 13, 14. This is adjacent to the Mosier Park property. And so the cumulative of those equates to about 1.27 acres. We discovered that there was an initial parkland calculation error, which resulted in the applicant submitting a proposal. It's basically 0.27 acres above what the requirement for dedication is. And the applicant had since testified at the Planning and Zoning Commission hearing that they were going to eliminate the 10,541 square foot dedication, the one that's adjacent to Mosier Park, in order to get the number closer to 1 acres of parkland dedication. So I just wanted to go through where these dedications are. This is the 25-foot wide one here on the east side of Mountain View. We've got the 35-foot wide one here that ends up going adjacent to Paradise Creek. We have the teardrop shaped park here at the center of the one-way drive on Amber Court. We also have, this is the one adjacent to Mosier Park, which the applicants testified that they're planning on removing to get closer to that 1 acre dedication requirement. So this was reviewed by the Transportation Commission at the regular meeting, and that happened on December 12, 2013. The recommendation the Commission wanted to convey regarding the plat was that the city should consider any measures that could be taken to accommodate McDonald Elementary School students that are likely to traverse the plat in the north-south direction along Jansen Street. So that's essentially coming from subdivisions to the south, heading south to north there, trying to make their way to McDonald Elementary School on D. Planning and Zoning Commission conducted a public hearing, and that happened on December 11th, 2013. The recommendation was for approval of the preliminary plat request with 3 conditions. The first one is that the applicant shall construct the undeveloped portion of Jansen Street, including all the underground utilities from the northern subdivision boundary of the proposed Harvest Hills subdivision to Damon Street before any building permits are to be issued for Phase 1 of the subdivision. Essentially, the Phase 1 dividing line is right there at the Jansen Street division. And this is pursuant to the June 2009 MOU. Second condition recommended by Planning and Zoning Commission is the applicant shall increase the diameter of Jordan Court cul-de-sac to 96 feet to meet the requirements of the 2009 International Fire Code. Third, the applicant shall comply with all City of Moscow development standards. And then, at the time, the Commission also expressed concern regarding the lack of on-street parking on 3rd Street, since it's currently designated as an urban collector with 2 bike lanes, 28-foot wide street. There's currently no on-street parking proposed on that 3rd Street alignment. The Commission had heard some public testimony, as well as public testimony included in your packet, with concern about the lack of on-street parking, as well as lack of adjacent local neighborhood streets to provide the on-street parking for that 3rd Street alignment. You have Jordan Court, which is fairly small in length. You have Mountain View Road, which is an arterial, currently doesn't have any on-street parking. And then the next nearest on-street parking would be further on to the east on Amber Court and Jansen Street within the development. So they made no formal recommendation but they did express some concern, and that's included within the Roman Criteria and Standards document before you tonight. So Planning and Zoning Commission essentially came away with 3 recommended conditions, 3 of which were of the 5 original conditions recommended by staff. Coming from the Public Works Department, the requirement that the applicant shall construct the undeveloped portion of Jansen Street, including all the underground utilities from the northern subdivision boundary of the proposed Harvest Hills subdivision to Damon Street before any building permits are to be issued for Phase 1 of the subdivision pursuant to that 2009 MOU. Development standards was the same as Planning and Zoning Commission. This is one they chose not to adopt, which is the applicant shall provide a minimum of 60 feet for any utility easement that has 2 or more utilities within it.
How many feet did you say?
30 feet.
Okay.
Minimum 30 feet.
I think you said 60. Yeah, that's what I
Oh,
heard.
sorry. Did I? Yeah. I apologize.
I'll get you in a second, John.
And it's basically just within that Jordan Court cul-de-sac. There's 2 utilities and a proposed 20-foot wide utility easement. Brings us to the fire department. The applicant shall increase the diameter of Jordan Court cul-de-sac to 96 feet to meet the requirements of the 2009 International Fire Code if Jordan Court is greater than 150 feet in length from the center radius. And so, since the Planning and Zoning Commission hearing, we have met with the applicant numerous times to try to get the Jordan Court cul-de-sac issue resolved. They ended up moving the alignment up on the 60-foot diameter cul-de-sac and hopefully getting the 150 feet in length needed in order to not require the 96-foot wide radius. But, you know, we had met and discussed this multiple times, and we're not able to come to a consensus, so they're still exploring options about how to, you know, shift the cul-de-sac from the center of the radius of the Jordan Court cul-de-sac to where the street connects with 3rd Street in order to make that 150 feet in length. So the 96-foot requirement is not a recommendation. Brings us to the parks.
I can wait. I'll let him finish with his recommendations.
Recommendation that the Planning and Zoning Commission chose not to go with their recommendation is that the applicant shall not be allowed to place any restrictions on what type of park would be developed in the 12,112 square foot Amber Court cul-de-sac park. And with that, certainly be able to answer any questions that you might have.
John Weber had a question. John?
Yeah, the applicant shall comply with all City of Moscow development standards. Where do those standards come from? And are they a moving target?
Well, they'd be contained within our subdivision ordinance, our zoning code, as well as all the public works requirements that are currently adopted by City Council, street standards, just, you know, all the codes that we continue to work with that are reviewed and adopted by City Council.
So if the applicant and the city sits down to discuss this and come to an agreement, that agreement holds on both sides?
Well, for our City of Moscow development standards, you know, that is a requirement, and so any flexibility that we could provide, we certainly try to do, but when it comes down to it, you know, unless the council wishes to impose, you know, a different standard, those are the standards that we have adopted and we have to go off of.
Okay. Thank you.
Art, I'll go with Art first.
Yeah. Have you had any discussions with the developers about the 3rd Street and parking?
Yeah, we met with Scott a couple times. I think he can certainly speak for his client, but I don't believe that there's really any progress made in trying to incorporate any on-street parking within the 3rd Street alignment.
What's the distance represented by 3rd Street between Mountain View and the intersection of Jansen?
It's around 1,700 lineal feet.
So, third of a mile or so?
Yeah, correct.
Walter?
Mike, what does the city consider a residential block length? 1,700 feet's not a block. What do y'all consider to be a normal block, if there is such a thing?
600 feet.
Bill?
The adopted block length standard is 660 feet. 660 feet is the adopted block length standard.
Okay.
In this situation, because of the adjacent development that already exists to the north and the south, there is no likelihood or any ability for any cross streets until you reach Jansen Street. But our traditional block length standard is 660 unless terrain or other conditions impede that.
Thank you.
Wayne, you had a question?
Couple of questions. Mike, first of all, did I understand you to say that the developer has been able or has not been able to come up with a reconfiguration of Jordan Court to get to that 150-foot length?
I believe in the recent iteration, they're sticking with the 60-foot wide cul-de-sac, but they've been able to reduce the length of Jordan Court to 150 feet from the intersection of 3rd to the center of the radius of Jordan Court, and Mr. Becker could certainly speak to that.
So we're understood then that if in fact you get it reconfigured to 150 feet from the radius, that it'll be at 60 feet, but if you can't do it, it still has to be 96 feet. That's probably not a bargaining chip, right?
Your Honor,
Gary?
I think at some point, we're starting to question what the applicant may be
Okay.
putting out as their argument, or whether they...
And we'll hear from that person
So
pretty
it
soon.
seems to me that
Yeah, I'll ask
perhaps
my- I'll ask
the
my
public
other
hearing ought to
question
be
that I
open
had
to
then.
take that testimony, and then maybe the council follow up
Okay,
based upon that.
very good. Walter had a question.
I had one
The same
more,
thing.
Bill.
Was it
Just one
similar
more.
to that, Wayne?
That was on the right-of-way, the 30-foot easement for utility right-of-way. Staff wants 30 feet, but I see what planning and zoning recommended 20 feet.
Well, they had just not included that within their recommendation, so that wasn't one of the recommended conditions. It was still carried over from staff, and Mr. McDonald's probably prepared to speak
Well, then I
about
guess my question is, and if I appropriate time to ask it, is why do you need 30 feet? That's an awful wide just for utility easement, is it not?
Well, actually, when you start thinking about the access to a utility, if you need to go in and replace or repair that utility, it's actually not all that wide if there are multiple utilities. Generally speaking, when you think about a utility that's traversing through a yard or between houses, and you've got to get a backhoe in there, and possibly even a dump truck in there, generally speaking, you want to have about 10 feet on either side of the utility line. So that's why one utility typically sees a 20-foot easement. When you go to 2 utilities or more, generally speaking, we're looking for a 30-foot easement in some fashion. With 3 utilities, being water, sewer, and storm, 2 of those can be a little closer together, and so you can make it work within the 30. With 2 utilities, you can make it work within the 30. 1, you can go down to 20. So it's generally just an access issue and being able to get in and operate a backhoe, make the swing of the hoe, and bring in any kind of materials that you might need to bring in if you're looking at a replacement or maintenance repair of some sort.
Tom, you had a
I
question?
just have one clarifying question. Jensen is shown spelled both with an E and with an O in your material.
Which is
In
correct.
In O is...
It's an O?
O.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions to Mike before we open the public hearing?
I just need a clarification if I can, Mr.
Okay,
Mayor.
Wayne?
Well, Mike, back to this 30-foot, or whoever wants to answer it. You said it wasn't part of planning and zoning's recommendation. However, the motion was to approve the application, including all staff recommendations except 1D. 1D was the requirement for the 30-foot easement.
Reading from the minutes.
1D was the staff's recommendation for 30-foot easement.
I don't know where you're reading from.
Oh, that's from the planning and zoning minutes.
Well, Wayne, the planning and zoning had their criteria and their recommendations. After that hearing, city staff added things on their recommendations too, which we don't need to necessarily take. Once we go through the public hearing process, we can make the decisions on or I said the body here can make the decisions on what recommendations it wants to move forward with.
Right.
So that's that will be in front of us.
That might be incorrect in the minutes. The approval document, the relevant criteria and standards, which is just right before that, would list, the last page, it'll list what the recommended conditions are. They're essentially all staff's recommendations, with the exception of the parkland preference coming from Dwight, as well as the easement width of 30 feet. And so,
Okay.
Okay? I think we're good, Mike, so I think we'll go ahead and open the public hearing. I'll open the public hearing. I'd like to hear from the applicant, please, or whoever is representing the applicant. Please state your name and address and who you are, what you do.
Hi, I'm Scott Becker with Hodge & Associates, 405 South Washington, here in Moscow. I'd like to address that easement issue. The easement, I think just to throw it out as a blanket statement that we need a 30-foot easement every time there's 2 utilities in a trench, I think might be some overkill. In this area, it's a very short run. It's very accessible from both ends, from the cul-de-sac or from the parkland. So I think a 20-foot easement is plenty wide to get a mini X or even a backhoe in there to dig it out and work on a utility. Another consideration is I don't recall ever having to dig up a PVC utility lately. Any sewer that we have that we've gone to PVC, they don't wear out or break down that fast. So you're looking at maybe digging it up once every 75 years. It seems like a huge waste of space to take a 30-foot chunk of land when we can do it in a 20. So we'd like you to consider making that easement a 20-foot easement as we show on the plat. The other issue, the cul-de-sac, we can move the cul-de-sac towards 3rd Street and get the center of the cul-de-sac within 150 feet of 3rd Street. So talking to Joe Williams, he wasn't sure if that was good enough or not. So I think that's considered, less than 100, or we can get it less than 150 feet. So anything under 150 feet, they say does not need a turnaround. So it's kind of splitting hairs whether you go to the, where you count your 150 feet to. But if we go to the center of the cul-de-sac, we can reach that point. We looked at some other alternatives. We looked at a hammerhead. It just didn't fit into what we wanted to do. It didn't look very nice. If we go to a larger cul-de-sac, it just eats up all the land and almost becomes undevelopable. So we'd really like to, with your consideration, we would go with the 60-foot cul-de-sac radius. Okay. My third point, and maybe I didn't say this earlier, Mike did a fantastic job taking us through the history of this project. He did a great job. Our concern also was with parking on 3rd Street. We're providing a road section that's wide enough for 2 lanes of traffic and parking on both sides. Now, since the city's calling it a collector, they're saying, no, we can't have parking on there. It has to be something else. If the city wants to truly make it a collector, would they entertain the idea of participating in some widening during development rather than widening somewhere in the future? That way, if we do it just as 2 lanes of traffic and parking, I think it'd be a great street. It would slow down. It would work as a traffic calming, slow traffic down. But if we want to make it wider, add bike lanes, would the city entertain the idea of participating with that addition? So those were my concerns for this.